as human beings from other participants and members of God's creation. All creatures in creation are loved by God. We're all interrelated and interdependent. Creation must be shared to meet creatures' needs, sharing and all creatures' needs. He didn't say just human needs. Creation must be loved and restored. Bishop Skillstad listed 4 things. We're stewards. We have a responsibility for dialogue. We need to be lovingly concerned. And we need to respectfully integrate complementary uses of the land and natural resources. I think I'll stop there. I had some things to say about wealth and the obsession with wealth, and maybe we can get that going in the question and answer time. But I hope that's given you a little flavor of what the faith community brings to this discussion and debate. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Our next speaker is Randall Fleming, who is an architect who earned his architecture degrees from the University of California in Berkeley. He is the co-founder and managing director of Community Design and Planning Services at UC Davis. And he has been engaged in community outreach throughout Northern California as well as Northern New Mexico. And his research and outreach activities focus on integrating economic and environmental systems with quality of life criteria, which I think will take off nicely from where Mark ended.
Yeah, I think it actually, if I can grab this, I think it actually fits in quite well to Mark's comments, especially on the subjects of stewardship and human sense of community. What we have been doing for the past several years is studying sustainable development. I now have a 3-year grant from the Environmental Protection Agency that's dealing with the subject of urban villages, and we're researching particular urban patterns that, in our view, blend and integrate environmental considerations, integrate social, and integrate economic, and integrate them beneficially. These things are probably following what you hear in smart growth principles, in the sense that they mix land uses, they use resources efficiently, they're pedestrian and humanistic oriented, and they can be a pleasure to live, work, and live in. Yet as we start studying them and start looking at them, I'm actually finding them quite a different animal, and that they're not single-family housing, or they're made more complex. They're not multifamily housing with more people in it. They're really about a different way of living, and they're about a different choice. The hypothesis that I would present today is, number one, that sustainability is this integration. It's achieving this integration of systems that will make, in our view, the world work and growth work. In doing this, you have to combine both science, so you understand impacts. You also have to work with the local context, and that's where the democratic principles kick in. You have to understand what people value, what the market needs, and what the particular characteristics of the market would be that could live in these kind of things. I'll be showing you some examples that are radically different in scale and how it works, yet I think they're seeking the similar principles. I would say that in our view, growth management, and it goes both ways. It both limits it and it extends it. In fact, increases diversity in urban patterns. And that diversity creates choice. And that choice is an essential part of being free, to be able to select how you decide to live. Just a quick sharing of the kind of the qualities we're seeing, that we tend to talk about land use, but I think it's the use of land and the use of place that we're finding most interesting with urban village living. The human scale can be approached in a variety of different ways, and I'll show you some examples of that. There's a wonderful set of study about the symbiotic relationships between opposing qualities. And it's a different way of thinking. It's not like you build singular life patterns. In fact, it's the fact of opposites coming together that make a place full and rich in these particular patterns. The neighborhood is a place where you can live in your daily part, your life. It can accommodate daily living. Where you live in your personal space is your neighborhood as well as your home. That when I talk to people who have been in these environments, they personally identify with every sidewalk, with every building, whatever. It's a real different, to me, coming from a Davis environment, a more suburban environment. It's a really interesting connection and strong connection to place. I also think time is different in these places. I think it's both fixed, it's changing, and it's also perhaps a cultural touchstone. So there's the idea of ancestor, and there's the idea of future in it. What I'd like to do is run through some examples and share with you some of the comparative data that I think makes this stuff interesting. If we could switch on the slides, and then those below this, the smoking sign is 2 white buttons. Maybe see if those, there we go. Now, I'm going to start with Davis, which in fact is the densest town in the Central Valley. There's more people living per acre in this town. Now, it's about 8.4 people per acre living in this place. In the central part of Davis, at a core about 225 acres, it bumps up to about 19 people per acre. But how this is achieved is real simple. I mean, there's a new development, townhouses, a green street, and bike path. You go into this development, there's single-family homes. Yet behind those homes are cottages that can be rented by the homeowner or used by the homeowner for the family or office purposes. Within about a block or 2 blocks from that development, you enter in the core of the downtown, which is largely a one-story, kind of benign downtown area. That is a result of policy which says that services and community activities are to occur in the downtown, not in more regional or automobile service developments around the town. There's a farmer's market in a park that is at the edge of the commercial part of the downtown core. A park associated with that combined with the activities, and this is the notion of use of land rather than land use. The use has changed radically here depending on the events going on. And this is looking back at both the market, and then you can see kind of that fountain thing in the distance. Now, this was a referendum that made this possible. It was going to be a commercial development on this property, about almost a sidewalk to sidewalk with underground parking, a commercial mall. It was a referendum. And this is where the notion of democracy, to me, and community involvement, local values kick in. But this made this place to happen. Now, actually, let me just go back here for 1 second. I'm going to be using figures such as this to explain the difference in these places. The issue of access, to walk to a local shop from an average walking distance in this 225 acre core area is 5 minutes. To walk to employment, major employment center, meaning UC Davis campus, to the center of that campus, 15 minutes. To walk to that park where you saw everybody playing and doing stuff from the core area is 5 minutes. Okay, oops. Somewhere I've gotten confused here. We're jumping to, you've seen slides of North Beach in San Francisco. And this is another area that we're studying. I don't have the population figures on it yet, but we've got some interesting stuff on this. It is a neighborhood that I would say is a reverse growth situation, where they have kind of locked it in. I mean, by codifying their landscape, height limitations, etc., are what really is driving now the nature of this area. And this is one where the neighbors are extremely connected to every detail of the private-public realm. Even on the level of the post office sign, there's a lot of objections to the new post office that remodeled the building, but it put up a corporate eagle, of the post office on that building. They're saying, we're not about corporate society here. We don't like that image. We want it to be more about people. Let's get a nice old eagle, kind of, or whatever. And so that's... Now let's talk about access and stuff in here. I mean, a few minutes in your Chinatown, completely different choice of diversity in place. Another few minutes, and actually to walk to Union Square from North Beach is 19 minutes. To get to a shop, if let's say for local services, is within several, let's say 4 minutes. Now, to walk to the waterfront, a major recreational or major environmental natural setting, is 8 minutes from the average distance from North Beach. Okay. Now we're going to keep pumping up the level here. This is one of the highest, most dense areas in North America, which is the West End in Vancouver, BC. It is 480 acres. It has 41,000 people. Compare that to Davis that had like 225 acres and about 2,000 people in the core area of town. Now, what's kind of fascinating about this is how it kind of mixes stuff together. You've got preservation of the old pattern and small public space and urban space, as well as that beach you just saw. You have the old pattern of streets, which is the narrow street. You know, this is a lot of Peter Calthorpe's new urbanism kind of principles are in this street here. But look at this place. You can see a little bit of a building in the upper left corner. And this is that street from the air, or from higher up. This green thing is that street surrounded by these buildings. This is where you're mixing, again, opposites, very much a human scale with a very intensely developed area. The 75% of the people in this neighborhood live in 5-story or more buildings. Yet you've got, again, breaking scale, and you've got breaking place and diversity in place. You have commercial areas that are linked through and loop through this entire neighborhood. Then the place transitions from this pumped up urban area into this natural landscape. You can see a bit of water right here to a seawall that you can walk 6 miles through virtually a forest and parkland. Now, let's go and look at access figures on that. They're particularly interesting. The average walk from this 41,000 population area, everyone's average walk to a local shop is 3 minutes. The average walk to employment is 12 minutes. The average walk to a beach, this is not a commercial waterfront, this is a beach that's open to you, is 4 minutes. Amazing lifestyle, I mean, amazing combination of opposing forces, pumped up urbanness, incredible nature, right at your fingertips. Now, where we're taking these ideas, we're also studying other places that are not quite as dense, like parts in Berkeley. We're looking at Midtown and Sacramento and understanding how those are working. But these are some preliminary ideas of relating.
Couple of minutes.
Okay, we're relating to the Central Valley. Number one, making place by tying into our agricultural heritage and our food that's available. Number two, to connect that to urban areas with bigger buildings that look like our traditional Central Valley downtowns, and where there's old buildings as well as new. To really be sensitive of the living environments we make in these things that include a lot of green and trees that are right in our climate. And then to come up with a pattern. Let's say that we can study. This particular thing has 50 people per acre at 1.4 jobs per acre in this particular system. Now, what that does, if you extrapolate that out to the Central Valley, take our average town, which is 4.5 people per acre, try to bump up the density to 12 to 16 people per acre, with 5 to 10% of the land area of a city doing this kind of thing here, and about maybe 40% of cities with second units, like that Aggie Village that I started with in Davis, that had the cottages, you can really cut greenfield land development down, about maybe 50, 70%. And yet, I think what you're also doing is giving people choice. You're giving people different ways to live. I mean, and there's niche markets out there that I think are not properly served in this valley. In Sacramento region, 45% of the people that live in these type of places, meaning either the younger and also the older, they're not too much family places, would, in my mind, at least 25% of those, or a certain percentage of those, would welcome a very more active, more rich choice in their living environment.
Okay, thank you very much. We're very pleased to have with us today Eleni Sakopoulos, who is president of AKT Development Corporation, which, as most of us, I think, know, is one of the largest developers in the valley. It Over the last 2 decades, it has developed land on which have been built more than 40,000 homes and over 30 million square feet of office, commercial, and industrial space. Currently, AKT controls over 25,000 acres of land in and around Sacramento. Ms. Sakopoulos joined AKT as a project manager responsible for 3,000 acres of development in North Natomas. She is a graduate of Dartmouth College and has a master's in business administration from UC Berkeley, and is a resident of Sacramento, and I think most of us know a member of one of Sacramento's most prominent families. So I can turn it over to you.
Thank you, Angus. Thank you very much for your introduction. I have to admit, I should have looked at the list of speakers you had on the panel today, and I probably would have maybe beefed up my speech a little bit. I think I'm the minority because I know John. I know what he's going to talk about. I think we sit on the Sacramento Habitat Conservation Plan Steering Committee together. It's true, I'm a land developer. Our company does do master plan communities in and around this region. But I hope that the perspective that I can share is one which reflects the fact that we, as much if not more than anybody, are as concerned about growth in California and how to plan for this growth. I know this theme that has come out in the last few years that has been overwhelming and in many senses a call to arms are these numbers that have come out of the state for what the population growth looks like, and that the numbers that we hear are that over the next 20 years, California will add 5 million new jobs, we will have 12 million new residents, and we will have 2 million new children in our school systems. These numbers are absolutely staggering and percentage-wise rival the numbers of when California, in the gold rush, when all of the world wanted to come to California, and in a matter of a very short time we achieved the population to become a state. So it is staggering. And from our perspective, from my perspective, what we really need to do, what we need to be thinking about is not should this happen, how do we shut the doors, or how do we, to turn our back on the situation, but rather to accept the fact that this is the trend, this is what's happening, and how do we accommodate for this growth while still preserving our quality of life in California, which, in my perspective, is the best in the world. So my own view when I was a kid and a kid of a developer and roaming around, from place to place, different cities where I lived, and I love cities. I have a passion for cities. I spent 3 months working in New York, and I was staying with my cousins, and she was gone for the summer, and she had left her car in the garage, and for the 3 months I was there, I never once even went and looked at the car. I didn't know what color it was, and the keys were sitting on the counter the whole time, and there was just absolutely no way that I felt any desire to go get in a car to go anywhere, because even if I went out of the city, there were trains that took you everywhere, and it was incredible, and it was such a wonderful quality of life to be able to walk out your front door and go to the grocery store, go do things, and to live in this place where the way that it felt to me, the way that cities have always felt to me, is that you live in this amazing community, and your apartment is like your bedroom. It's like a big house, and that's your room. And anytime you want to walk into the kitchen, which is just, these cafes or places down the street, there are all these people around. And it makes you feel, at least if you're the kind of person who likes to feel a part of a community, it makes you feel really good. It makes you feel the opposite of being alone. And a lot of people are driven and respond to that. But on the other side of the spectrum, people are also driven to this American dream to have their own single-family home with their own backyard for their kids to play in, and room and space and this, their piece, their place in the world. And this becomes especially more important to people when they have children. So when I used to ponder these things, and coming back to California and after school and living in San Francisco for a while and finally coming back here, and I came back right as we were starting the Laguna West development, right as we were we had just broken ground at 90, 91, and I came back right around 93, and we're actually still building that project down. And that was a Peter Calthorpe designed, this pedestrian pocket experiment down in the Laguna area just south of Sacramento. And Phil Angelides, who's now the treasurer of the state, worked with us on that project. We would philosophize about growth and about how to grow. And I said, God, why don't we have, I looked all over when I moved to Sacramento. I couldn't find a decent apartment in downtown that was, like an apartment in San Francisco. But you just can't find anything. How come there are no great apartments down there? And we talked about these things, and he reminded me of, from one of my land planning classes in college, how the great cities of the world grew. You look at to me, the most beautiful cities like Paris and New York and Boston and, some of these beautiful cities, and even the small ones in New Hampshire where I went to school that had a village green in the center and dense buildings all the way around it radiating outward. And they're all pre-automobile society. And California is not a pre-automobile society. We are absolutely, no matter how you look at it, no matter how you try to sugarcoat it, we are an automobile society. And trying to change that, to me, it just seems as though there are easier ways to try to improve the quality of life and try to take it that, okay, well, let's just change this fact that we're an automobile society. Because Phil said, look, if we had gas prices like they are in Europe, then it would change the dynamics of growth in California. You would get centers because people would demand being able to walk to their jobs. And so I used to carry around this vision in my head like, that's all we need, that's all we need. We need to figure out a way to convince people that gas should be really expensive and that will take maybe 20 years before the effects are realized, but it'll create a dynamic that will grow in a more preferable way. Will grow like these wonderful old pedestrian scale cities. And now, not only do I think that it's more impossible than ever as I see the trends coming down the pipeline, but I'm also not even convinced it will work anymore because of the emergence of technology. Because now, if you look at how people needing to live next to their jobs and these businesses needing to locate next to one another, that's not necessary anymore. And so, as you thought of these clustering effects sort of occurring as a result of gas prices being high, well, what would happen is they would just have, they would still go after the less expensive land, and there would still be fragmentation, and people would just use technology to communicate. So that whole, well, maybe one day sort of dream, in my view, has almost completely dissipated. So what can we do? Where are we? Where does this leave us? And I will say that one of the things that I am most concerned about in our business and that is changing in California, and one of the things that I group into this issue of quality of life here is this notion that we are becoming less and less affordable as a place to live. Over the last, I wrote the statistic down, over the last few years, and I think it's over the last 10, 15 years, for every 5.4 jobs, new jobs that have been created in California, we've had one new housing start. Now, if you have a house already and you like your house and you don't anticipate wanting to move, this is kind of good for you because your home value is going to go up because there's more demand for that home. And so you think, great, I'll just live here till I'm 60, then I'll sell it and it'll be worth a lot of money, and then all I need is a small condo because my kids are grown up or whatever. But if you have kids and you think about their going out and being able to buy a house, or if you just are concerned overall, I mean, this is really an issue that for part of what has made California this great place is that if you are within the bell curve of median income level owner, you can have a house and not an apartment and not be a renter, but you can own a home. And you look down in the Bay Area, the dynamic that's happened there, and down there it's been even more dramatic, where for every 9 jobs there's only been 1 new housing start, and people can't live there. They're looking at each other and saying, wow, I'm making more money than I ever could possibly have dreamed, and my husband's making more money than he could possibly ever have dreamed, but we're going to have a baby, and we don't want to live in an apartment anymore. We want to have a house, and we can't. And so, and I know that this is a philosophical issue, and I know that there are those who would say that, well, they shouldn't. They should live in an apartment because that will be better for urban issues if more people had families and lived in apartments. But I still think that we have a luxury in California, that we still have enough room to grow and be able to accommodate that growth in a way that will not destroy our quality of life from an environmental standpoint, and that will still allow for people to have affordable housing. And so one of the things that we look at doing then, and what we take as a premise, is that there's room to grow, and that we should still in California be able for median income, even if it's 2 wage earners, to be able to have their own home. So that then leads into this sort of final thing that concerns us, concerns me, and that I'd like to touch on, which is this notion that, what is then the best way for quality of life purposes to grow in California? Now, I'm a big believer, as I know anybody with half a brain has got to be a big believer in improving our downtowns and improving the existing condition of the brownfields, and hopefully reducing the standards of cleanup if it's not, for a school site or some other place, that you can encapsulate and redevelop more easily than existing conditions provide the brownfields in the downtown areas, and subsidizing downtowns and revitalizing them, I think is critically important. But I think it's critically important because I think that, as Mr. Fleming was saying, that people need choices, and for the young people and for the old people, and also just that is in terms of doing what human beings have always done, which is building in such a way that it's a testament to the greatness of our society. Okay, 1 minute. And that I think that having beautiful downtowns that are centers, that you go to a city and you don't say, oh, LA, there is no there there. You get there and there is no there there. That you want to have places like this, and it is very important. But at the same time, we are going to grow in the suburbs. And this is what we do, and I have like less than a minute to talk about it. But I will say, we do master plan communities, and we start with 500 acres at a time, or 1,000 acres at a time, and we say, where are you going to put the roads, where are you going to put the schools, where are you going to put the single family homes, where are you going to put the multifamily homes, where are you going to put the parks, are you going to put lakes, how are you going to put the parks in, and and bike trails, and what are you going to do? How are you going to create this place that's going to be livable and wonderful and a good place for people to live? And working with Peter Calthorpe on Laguna West, we learned a lot of things. We learned that split sidewalks are fantastic. And you saw some pictures of that, where you have a tree-lined street as you're driving down the street, but then you have a sidewalk, and then you have the front door, and those are inviting. And if you create inviting environments with landscape, which is something that as a master developer we can do that. There are certain things we can do, there are certain things we have very little control of that you people, the market, drives. So using landscaping has been critically important. Having streets that are inviting to walk on, having streets that are interconnected as opposed to just lots of roads with cul-de-sacs on the end of it, we find to be very important, very critical. And then the one of the things that's happening that is the most exciting thing to me of anything we've done in a long time is something that has blossomed with Laguna West, which is the idea of our town center. The town center was something that we gifted to the community. We built it. No one else had done. No one else has ever done that in this region that I know of, that anyone could point out to me, which is we built a town hall We gave the land and we gave the town hall to the city. The homeowners association pays for the maintenance of it, but it was our gift to the community to try to help foster the sense of place and create a better community. Now, it is a public facility, so people from all around can use it, and it's crowded. It's booked 360 days a year. I was down there last night. You have meetings in every meeting room. You have ballerinas, little 3-year-old ballerinas walking with their mothers over to a little community ballet class. It is wonderful, and it has really added to that community. But there's a company, nationwide publicly traded company called Lennar. Lennar is a home builder and developer, but primarily home builder nationwide, and they bought Windcrest Homes, which is a local home building company, which we have worked with Windcrest forever in all of our projects. And Lennar has added this very wonderful dimension in that they believe that community centers are so valuable, and that people are starting to understand and realize that the sense of community in the suburbs, in the suburbs, in the way that we're growing, sense of community is almost being depleted and in those areas, and that they're resisting that, and that they're starting to realize that how important it is for them, and women when they have a child, if they're home alone on maternity leave or they're not working at all, that they feel isolated in their homes, and depression, issues that we look at the way that we live now compared to the way that we evolved and as human beings living in groups and tribes and all this sort of thing. And so what we're doing in this, and I'm going to wrap up right now,
Okay.
and I can talk about it later if anyone wants to ask me about it, is we are establishing funding mechanisms to create a community center that is paid for and built by us, but paid for by each of those single-family homes that lives in the community. So if you look at the Sun City, you look at senior communities where seniors buy their house and are immediately part of this clubhouse and are immediately part of this club that has activities directors and people who are there fostering community and a place for them to go to watch TV, to bring their kids, this whole thing for parties. We're doing that on the scale of affordable housing. And this is the second one in Sacramento. The first one's under construction by Lennar in Natomas, North Natomas. The second one we're doing down in the Laguna area in Stone Ridge. And this is really exciting because this is something that is happening, something that we're doing, and it's not a panacea, and there are no panaceas, I don't think, but it's something that I think will go a long way in helping make the suburbs more livable, which is something that I think will really improve the quality of life and livability in California. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Elena. Our next speaker is John Hopkins, who is the president of the Institute for Ecological Health. He has been very active here in Sacramento, and as an example of that is the vice chair of the steering committee for the South Sacramento County Habitat Conservation Plan, which is another kind of way, another device increasingly popular for trying to negotiate conflicts between growth and environmental values. Among his many activities, which might be an interesting conversation between the Sakopoulos and Mr. Hopkins, is that he is a member of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Vernal Pool Ecosystems Recovery Plan team. Mr. Hopkins graduated from Oxford University in England and has his doctorate from Harvard University.
One of the problems of speaking last is that people have either said everything...
Oh, I've got a whack at this too, so you may not be entirely
okay,
last.
almost last, is that either people have said everything you want to say, or they've made you think of 25 new things that you should say, and furthermore, you're running late, so please be brief. I grew up in a town in England that has been growing slowly and compactly for 2,000 years or so. So coming to California via many years in the Boston area has been quite an experience. This is an amazing place in the way that we utilize land. And we have one of the things, our organization, which by the way it's a sustainable land use organization with a broad array of members, business people, farmers, cattle ranchers, bankers, developers, planners, scientists, conservationists, all sorts of good folks across the state of California and in central Arizona. But one of the things we did recently in this region was to put together some historical maps showing growth of the multi-county Sacramento region since 1850. And you saw how for the first quite a few decades growth was very compact. There was a rush after the gold rush of growth, and then in terms of area, we didn't expand a huge amount for a long time. We were using what Randall Fleming called the old pattern of growth, which was compact communities with the different uses mixed up so that people would be living next to or above the shops and places of business and so on. Come 1925, that began to change, and presumably with the advent of the automobile. And the biggest spurt of growth really was between 1950 and 1975, and it's worth noting that between 1950 and the 1990s, Sacramento County has grown over 400%, from around under $250,000 in 1950 to around $1 million now. So the growth that may or may not happen in the decades ahead, in some ways, as a percentage term, is less than we've had in the past. However, in terms of the way we use the land, if we continue with the old patterns of using the land, then we would see this immense increase in the acreage that we develop. And people around from a whole variety of spectrums are beginning to realize this problem. The Institute for Ecological Health is one of the organizations that founded the California Futures Network. And initially, we were perhaps mainly environmentalists and people concerned about farmland preservation. But now, as you heard, the National Council of Churches is on board, the Silicon Valley Manufacturers Group is on board. A wide variety of people have been realizing that we have to change the way we've been doing business. And this realization has been around for several years. In the early 1990s, Governor Wilson had a growth management task force. And it came out of the report, then they didn't do anything because they found they had no growth to manage. But the point that they made was if we keep doing our growth in the way we have been doing since the 1950s, the separated development of subdivisions, shopping malls, business parks, everything separated, everything dependent on the automobile, then the social, the economic, and the environmental costs for the state of California with the growth of people that we're likely to have simply won't work. The folks in the Silicon Valley Manufacturing Group, which is a business group that represents all the high-tech businesses in Silicon Valley, have recognized that, oops, we made a mistake. And we have periodical linkages. I have copies here and at the back. And Leslie Coleman, the Manufacturing Group Vice President, wrote in one of our back issues, to quote her, when we started to develop in the 1960s and 1970s, we saw massive open space developed at about 5 units to the acre and built freely. Today, we are realizing the costs of that kind of growth. And if people had thought ahead and thought, well, what would happen if we paved over the whole of Silicon Valley? And how will it affect our society? And how do we grow in a way that provides for the growth we're going to have, provides for people's needs, but can still function? If people have been able to have some foresight and answer those questions, then maybe Silicon Valley would be working a whole lot better today than it is, and we wouldn't be seeing those endless streams of commuters going over Altamont Pass to and fro the bedroom communities in the Central Valley. And part of what we have to realize is there's a difference between having automobiles. Probably virtually everybody here came by automobile, and partly because we are not a transportation-friendly place. So many folks, it's just really difficult to go from A to B by public transport. So I know some people didn't drive, but my guess is most folks did. There's a difference between that and allowing automobiles to rule your life. And Bill Center, who was a former El Dorado County supervisor, has a nice little sort of cartoon, if you like. Imagine somebody from an alien planet coming and looking around planet California, if you like, and saying, wow, there's this two-legged species that lives here. And, but a lot of what it's doing is providing for the needs of another species that's a four-wheeled species, and that has totally enslaved the two-legged species, so that we provide for every whim and fancy and need of the four-wheeled species. And that, in fact, is a lot of what we've done. Rather than building so that automobiles are something that helps us, we have made a society where we are so dependent upon them, we have become enslaved to them. And this creates a large number of problems. Eleni mentioned the fact that we are beginning to see revitalization of downtowns. That is a critically important issue because what we've had for several decades all across the country is what I call an expanding donut. That growth is going out and out and out. And in the middle, there's a hole in the middle of the donut that's getting bigger and bigger. And that hole is older cities, older suburbs. We are failing to put our financial resources and to revitalize our older cities and suburbs, saying, let's build on new land, out, out, out. It's cheaper and easier. And the cities and the older suburbs decay, and they lose resources, they lose income, they lose jobs, and become very degraded places. And it's very, very enheartening to me that Phil Angelides, the new state treasurer, is putting tremendous emphasis on the need to retool how we spend our infrastructure dollars and to stop putting all that money into growing out, 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 and to begin to put a lot of that money into fixing up our older areas, into improving the quality of life of our older areas. If we do that, we can encompass a significant chunk of our likely increased population. And the market is there. And one thing I noticed in Sacramento, if you went back 2 years ago, as Eleni said, that you couldn't find anywhere to live like a nice apartment in downtown Sacramento. That is changing. Our board of directors last Saturday had a long discussion with one of Sacramento's leading developers who has a strong focus on infill development, and is chair of the Capital Region Development Authority. And these folks are busy putting in new housing, condominiums, single-family houses, apartments, in and around the state capital area. A year ago, there was a development put in called Metro Center in Midtown, and it sold out in a day, or just a few days. And I think that has completely changed the whole dynamic of the market within downtown Sacramento. And we're seeing this up and down in many communities across the state of California. So hopefully we can begin to change the way we use money and put more of our resources into our existing developed areas. We have to consider that people's quality of life is one issue, but only one issue. And it's interesting that Western society's moral philosophy over the centuries has focused very much on the individual. But we are beginning to realize that humans are part of a whole planet, part of an ecosystem that involves not only plants and animals, but ecological processes and functions that involve the earth, water, and the land. And that we cannot just blithely ignore the well-being of our planet and pretend that it will not affect us. In order for our society to be sustainable in the long run, we have to have sustainable ecosystems and a sustainable land. California is one of the biologically most rich places on the planet. It is also biologically one of the most endangered places on the planet. So we have a responsibility and a stewardship to those species and those ecosystems that are unique to California. We also have a responsibility to future generations of Californians so that they can still have a lot of the wonders that we've had in this and have managed to retain in the state, and that our ecosystems still work so that our urban areas do not become degraded. We also have a responsibility, those of us that live in the Central Valley, to the people on planet Earth, because we happen to live in the best agricultural region on the planet. The Central Valley provides 25% of the United States table food. It provides a big chunk of the food for Japan and other Asian countries. We're a major exporter. To turn the Central Valley into a largely urbanized area, as is quite possible over the next 100 years if we continue business as usual, is to throw away a lot of that food production value. You can't simply move it. Unfortunately for us, the initial cities in the Central Valley were agricultural service areas, And as they grow out, they grow, and the agricultural service areas quite naturally were where the best cropland was. So as we grow out in those cities, we are having an unpleasant habit of paving over the best cropland, which really does not make a whole lot of sense to me. And we've seen the same thing in coastal California, the Silicon Valley that I mentioned. 50 years ago, that was orchards in Santa Clara Valley. Ventura County's coastal plain is perhaps the most fertile land of the lot, where they can grow 4 crops a year. And until the good citizens of Ventura County sort of rose up last fall, we were paving that over at a rapid pace. So somehow we got to meet these challenges. We have to provide for growth that occurs, although I would point out to people those trends do not have to be inevitable. We could have less growth, we could have more growth, and there are perhaps some ways to change it. We have to provide housing and jobs and shops and everything for people so they have a high quality of life. But we also have to provide for farmland and rangeland, and we have to provide for the needs of nature. And in the interest of time, I'll shut up now.
Thank you very much. And you came very well. You certainly won the award for sticking to your time best. And given that we are running short, and that I think we have a great deal to discuss, I'm going to make my remarks very, very brief. But I just sort of want to introduce a little bit, as is my wont, of disagreeableness into the discussion, which is to say that I think that underneath all of the issues that we've talked about here and all of the ideas that we've talked about is a fundamental question that must be faced, which is the politics and specifically the regulatory politics, which includes the taxation politics, a whole gamut of incentives and punishments that are handed out by cities, counties, state, and federal government that either do or do not encourage leapfrog growth, the vast expansion of urban development. I just want to throw out one statistic in the growth of Los Angeles from 1970 to 1990. The population of the region grew by nearly 50%. At the same time, if you draw a line around the urbanized area and its expansion, it grew by 7 times that. So that we have a kind of growth, and I think we all know about it, we all understand it, which is ruinous to our landscape and our common life together. And I do not believe that that will be solved without the rigorous action of public agencies through politics to change that. And I believe that means fundamental political battles that must be waged in the state of California if most of the good ideas that have been talked about here are to either have fruition or to have fruition within a context which will support them over the long run and make them flourish. So I just want to say that I think there are some, aside from a great deal of good ideas, there is also the necessity for us to confront some very hard and very difficult political realities. I'll end with just one last slightly random thought, but it also has to do a bit with what I'm saying, which is that I do not think that public agencies necessarily have greater wisdom than private developers always, and I give as my prime example of that we all hate strip development, I think, above all things, and we have to remember that was a planner's idea, right? That was a public agency planner idea to get business out of residential areas. I think that in our public, in the politics of private development and the public regulation of that development, we also need a lot more intelligent thinking about how that's done, of the sort that has been explored by every one of our speakers today. So let's turn it over to the audience and see what kinds of ideas we have out here. Peter?
There are some forces that are probably just beyond the reach of any local or even state government. They reside at the federal level. I would guess, this is just a guess, that the most powerful force causing the gobbling up of land are 2 federal policies. One is a massive, massive tax subsidy to housing.
To what? I'm sorry.
Housing, which increases the quantity consumed of housing in this country approximately the other is a terrible underpricing of automobile transportation in urban areas having to do with the urban freeway system used at peak hours. Those are two policies essentially controlled by Washington and are absolutely implacable. I don't think there's a ghost of a chance of ever changing them. And if you can't do something on that front, it may be very, very difficult to move.
Okay, does anyone want to respond to that?
I think those would be very difficult to change. I'd point out with housing subsidies is I think home ownership is very important. Communities work better when many of the people who live in them own their own homes. And California has one of the lowest levels of home ownership in the nation. However, those homes do not have to be on the urban fringe. They can also be in existing developed areas. And I'm not really acquainted with mortgage policies, but some people say that the current system of mortgages favors the urban fringe homes, and I don't know if that's true or not, but obviously you could change your mortgage insurance and subsidy type systems to ways that favor development within existing developed areas. There is a third federal policy which has immense capability to destroy our landscape, and that is inheritance taxes. Farmers and ranchers who own farmland and rangeland in California are an aging group of people by and large, and time after time we see them having to, when they die, see their land split up in order to pay the inheritance taxes. And that is a problem for cropland. It's a huge biological problem for rangeland. A large ranch, properly managed, is wonderful wildlife habitat. As it gets split into smaller units, it becomes less and less effective as wildlife habitat and tends towards an ultimate destination of rural residential development. So changing inheritance taxes in a way that protect farmland and rangeland, and I think also small family businesses, would make a big difference. There's a whole range of, as you were pointing out, at different levels, everything from building codes to these federal procedures. There's a book called The Geography of Nowhere, and it pointed out in one place that the good things that Eleni and Randall have talked about in the different ways of planning, places that were often designed before planners, that these are now basically illegal because all the local building codes and zoning ordinances make them illegal. One simple example is to put an apartment or a condominium above a store. In many places, that is no longer legal.
Are there other responses to this point, or from Elena?
I'd just like to point out that I agree with everything you just said.
Thank you.
Except for the mortgage thing. I don't know if I...
Well, I said I wasn't sure.
All right.
Let's see,
Well,
Randall, I think.
okay.
I think, at least the way we're working, we're looking at the marketplace first, and looking at people and how they wish to live, and how areas that people are currently are living, let's say, are very high quality of life. Now, I think where you go with that is maybe referendum and initiative action. I know that the Vancouver region, when faced with these very decisions we've been talking here, agreed to set up a regional government, agreed to set up to not build infrastructure for automobiles, meaning that there's no freeways in the city. And because of that, it's also, they agreed to build high-density housing in the central part of the town, part of it being as an answer to transportation problems. I just think we have to assume responsibility for our community and the way we live. I don't think we have to, I think that's going to be the issue. And that's the way we're working, is it's, as more designers and things that deal with tangible parts, we want to deal with the tangible things you can touch in your daily life.
Mark, did you want to?
I think just briefly from a faith community perspective, there are a lot of sacred cows out there, and we haven't begun to list them all. And certainly the automobile is one. I remember an Earth Day event in Kansas, Earth Day 2 or 3, talking about the automobile as a false god. The housing issue and the tax subsidies for housing, I think, that takes a little bit more to develop. And I'm thinking about housing as a fundamental human right, the growth control ordinances that are on the ballot now, apparently in 4 communities in the Livermore area, Pleasanton, San Ramon. They really don't meet the ethical test of sharing with our fellow human beings. And if there are other ways of addressing that while providing adequate, affordable housing for everybody, and there's a diversity issue involved, there's a race issue involved, there's a class issue involved, but there are enough sacred cows out there that we're engaged in both the public policy process as well as trying to encourage, even though our denomination's embedded in this culture and in this economy, to be somewhat countercultural in restoring some values that really reflect environmental health and community.
Let's see, I'm going to go to Wolfgang and then here. So, start.
I was delighted by the diversity of viewpoints, all of which bear on the problem. And I'm particularly glad that Mark Carlson just now mentioned those labels of false gods and sacred cows. The sacred cow and false god, I want some comment from the panel on, which was only mentioned at the very end by John Hopkins, zoning. I think when you consider public policy and the realm of public administration, perhaps even more pernicious than the automobile, which we all bite our fingernails, we can't control it, is zoning. And you mentioned, Angus, that keeping business out of residential areas was somehow the initial spark. Well, indeed, most Americans don't know that much of our public policy, even preceding the New Deal, stems from the great thinkers at the great Midwestern universities, particularly the University of Wisconsin and the University of Chicago. And it was more than any other factor, I believe, in American history of the smell of the stockyards that the residents of Chicago, pushing their public administrators, created zoning. And in this country, zoning is a totally negative concept. It says only you can't do this here and you can't do this there. And zoning, if you face it as the evil that it is, makes all these things possible. Now, what we all want are the wonderful things you're talking about, and we can't get them because we're prevented by this idiocy of zoning. My question to the panel is, how can we get rid of zoning in the United States of America and do what Randall Fleming said, wonderful key words, to have use of or use for land rather than land use?
Okay. Responses? Surely a developer has some response to
I don't
that.
want to hog the
Some thoughts
microphone
about
too much, but as Eleni said, there are no panaceas. You've brought up some of the downsides of zoning. There are also good sides of zoning. If you look at some county general plans, then a lot of rural areas may have 320-acre minimum parcel size. They may be like in Marin County, western Marin County, where then there's a minimum parcel size of, I think, 60 acres, and uses are restricted to agricultural uses. So we are using zoning in many ways to conserve the rural character of farmland, rangeland, woodlands, and scrublands. And to my mind, that is a very important attribute. I think the issue is that we need to retool zoning, not throw it away, to make it a positive force based on what we need, rather than, as you pointed out, a negative force based on what people fear.
Randall?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's wonderful opportunity just, to take this issue on, like you say, but on the local level. I mean, if you look at the general plans of cities in our 6-county region, Sacramento Valley region, about 25% of them allow mixed use, okay? They vary maybe in densities. I mean, getting up to about 25 units an acre is pretty tough in a lot of the towns. But that's the place for me to say that people need to work. They need to work at the local level. You need to find out and set up these places. And I really like your statement on the positive spin on it. But see, I think at least what we're doing right now is to rethink it and to come up and understand positive, and not just from an academic view, but by input by residents who are living in this thing and in these settings to understand really what it is that makes life good for them. We take the view that zoning and policy should grow out of from place, okay? It's not the reverse, because then you'll never get place. You have to understand what the place is and its conditions, and then adapt your codes, that can allow it. I think part of the way this is going to shift is that I think, if we even just shifted to more performance-based structures, where we can have and be able to assess impacts from certain actions and see that they meet performance goals, that might really bend the way we do business. We're developing what we call living plans for communities, where they're not based on restriction and tight guidelines. They're based on what the community wants out of it, and then give them tools to measure that.
Eleni?
I'd like to say something on this, but I don't know if it really answers your question, because I can't imagine what it would be like not to have zoning. I don't know what that would end up meaning for how we would try to do things. I will say that there are...
Let me just say, I have this rather simple-minded notion that government could well say, as indeed it does in many modern Western, think particularly of suburban Paris, in France and England, if you look at what they do, rather than what you can't do, government can say much more what you can do.
Now, I am glad that you clarified that, because I think that's exactly the focus that ought to be played, that rather than, and one example is the R Street Corridor Plan downtown Sacramento, where we have a fairly notorious project that we're trying to, piece of property down there called Crystal Ice. And we were proposing to do office buildings down there. And what ended up happening with that was that this plan was crafted by the planning department, by neighborhood groups who are very, very, very concerned about what happened down there and revitalizing the R Street corridor. And they were purely and truly, in the goodness of their heart, they wanted to see something good happen. But they thought that the best way to make that happen was to create this plan that said you have to have setbacks from the street of X point X feet. You have to have step backs with any building. When you get to a certain height, then you have to push it in a little bit. You have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this. And they create this box within which you have to try to figure out what you can build. And it so stifles creativity that you eliminate the possibility of people coming in saying, that's an interesting piece of land. I would love to do this on that piece of land, and come up with a proposal and present that proposal to the community, because it may very well be that there are things that the community would want and would embrace, but the ability for somebody to come up with a creative proposal is totally stifled by the fact that they're first looking at this odd-shaped box that they have to fit their project inside. At the same time, on the positive side of zoning and on the positive side of constraining land with zoning or with development agreements or design guidelines and all these other things in our master plan communities, we can put these things, certain things in place that we think are important, like the certain number of trees and the kinds of trees and building materials requirements that we put in from the private sector, so we're sensitive to what the builders, the home builders and the commercial builders will accept, but at the same time, we don't constrain them so much that they don't go there. And those are things that then once we sell the land, we still have some control to make sure that what's being done down there is what we envision, so that there's the cohesiveness that the project develops well.
A month ago, I was at the Monterey County Smart Growth Forum, sponsored by the Monterey County Business Council, and they're embarking on redoing their general plan in the county. And they really are committed to an open participatory process of consensus building and all those things that seem to be working in a lot of communities to a point. But they were really very weary of bitter growth battles. That was very evident. And I don't know any of the details, but you could see that, the level of frustration and the sense of rebirth and newness in embarking on this process. So I think that is something to be looked at for other communities.
Teresa?
I was just interested in the long run, like who are the stewards of long run issues that as I understand, in one area, the vernal pools have been covered over, and the groundwater, there's no way for the water in that area to get down to the groundwater. It's having an impact on the groundwater level. So in the future, there's going to be implications from that for us. And, or even just take the food, like you had talked about, we're growing food in California for a big percentage of people. And as we continue with our land use the way that it is, I mean, if you do any kind of an economic planning out into the long run, it doesn't look very good. And so what I'm wondering from all of you is there anybody who's a steward, of the long run, that's looking at those long run issues? And also, is there any way to measure the cost of, the vernal pools, say, going away, and what the implication is on groundwater? Is there anybody that's doing anything in terms of measuring that, that would cause that to be introduced into planning now? And then lastly, I just wanted to ask, because your family is sort of notorious in terms of neglect around the vernal pool issue. I don't know if it's fair. I just have been reading in the paper, recently, and so I don't know if that's fair or not. But it seems like there is like a disregard or a disrespect for those issues, and I would be interested in your perspective on it, and then also the answer to my other questions.
Oh, okay. You've laid out quite an agenda here, but since we have a direct...
Are we out of time?
Oh, no, we have 8 minutes.
Well, what can I tell you? Of course, I think that there are allegations that our family is notorious, and our neglect for the vernal pools or the environment is an unfair statement. I think it's also untrue. It's very, very complex, and I could speak for about 2 hours on this whole issue. And so to try to summarize it would be very difficult. I guess the first thing that I would say is that just in the words that you use and the way that you describe the issue and this idea, is there any great steward? I think that maybe Mark Carlson, and we would have to turn to theology for that type of an answer, or we would have to turn to some other system of government that we don't have in the United States, because we have a democracy here. But that within a democracy and a market system is the economic system of a democracy, and within that there are market failures. And the environment is one thing that is this collective issue, that there is no direct market for the protection of the environment. There is sort of becoming one in odd ways as we move forward, but essentially we're kind of all sort of struggling along, figuring out what is the best road ahead, and how do we take care of our immediate needs, but how do we make sure that we don't choke and our kids don't choke, and we don't turn into this horrible wasteland that you see in science fiction movies. So, I guess the reason I set this up like this is because I think that there's so much animosity that's developed against developers, against anybody. I mean, around this whole discussion, it's extremely emotional, and sometimes people speak and it's not necessarily rational. And I think that the biggest problem is that it's so hard to know, and there aren't a lot of clear answers. And what a lot of these environmental issues have become are down and dirty fights between people over private property rights and various other things. So now, as far as vernal pool preservation and what we personally have done, I could tell you as well. We've preserved the single largest area by a private entity for vernal pools down on our Borden Ranch. It's 1,400 acres, and we put that into preservation as part of our development down there, which they constantly call us as developers or development in Borden Ranch. We're building vineyards down there, and so that goes to the farming issue. John, I'm sure, can speak a lot more eloquently on the actual biological benefits and necessity of the vernal pools, but I've been on an airplane up and down the state, and if you go up toward the foothills, we have tremendous resources. And so the bitter battles that ensue over a vernal pool, for instance, on one of our developments that was located up in the middle of a project that had its entitlements and was ready to move forward and was stopped and the cost of preserving this one single vernal pool on site was going to be $6 million. And so we had to go through this very painful, very bitter, very unnecessary negotiation with the federal agencies to figure out how to deal with that one vernal pool to a cost, and I'll stop here, because this is a big issue and it's very multifaceted. But I would just say that as you look, and maybe this is just my comment on all of these environmental issues, that as you look at these things to try to look and be a steward yourself, but look at these issues as a way to try to find good common solutions for everybody, as opposed to emotional debates over the people plowing through land and destroying Mother Nature and all that, versus the people who just want to stop and halt everything, because neither of those answers is the way that things are going to, that's not, struggling at the ends is not the best way to come up with a middle path.
I'd like to comment, and I'll try to keep it really brief, hard as it is, given the questions that you raised, but just 2 points that I'd like to make. One is, as a person who's been teaching in environmental studies for nearly 30 years, I'm going to say sort of the developer's line here. There isn't any place in California that we can develop that doesn't have precious environmental values involved, many of them protected by law. Right? And if we want to protect many of those values, then we're going to have to talk about denser development, and we're going to have to talk about more contiguous development. It's just that simple. If we go to the foothills, we have all sorts, if you start moving to the foothills, we'll be there too, fighting over species you haven't heard of yet that are precious. Wherever you go, we're going to have these fights, whether it's vernal pools or species of oaks or whatever. That's where we really have to bite the bullet on how serious we are about protecting these values. Second point I want to make, and I wish I had more time to talk about this. I'd intended to earlier, but in the interest of time didn't, is that all of these things are making their way through the court systems. And one of the things that we have is some court decisions coming from the Supreme Court, the most significant one, which nobody can quite figure out what it means, of Lucas versus the South Carolina Coastal Council, which begins to turn American law on the issue of regulatory takings, which is a critical issue for everything we're talking about here, in a direction much more favorable to development and much more costly to the process of government regulation. And I wish I had time to explore that. I wouldn't be surprised if our local case makes its way up an appeals process quite a long ways and may contribute to that process of case law on that. It's something that those of you who are interested in this question should look into and should realize that the Reagan court appointees are young and with us and vigorous. They're going to have, they are, in a sense, are becoming our present long-term stewards. We need to look at that process. Randall?
Just on the comment of stewardship, because I liked what you said, I think it takes actually a real commitment, a real cultural base for stewardship to be on the table. And in our work in northern New Mexico, I sat in with supervisors saying, hey, we're here for a very short time. We have to do the right thing to the land. We have to do the right thing to the people. We want it to continue for our people. I'm not hearing that here in California when we work. It's a real different base. And I think, but the people are asking similar, in New Mexico, they're asking similar questions here, which is still, what is the right way now to do that? So I think we have to get down to really what is scientifically and value system right. In your vernal pool value idea, I haven't seen anything that has given value numbers on it, but there are some great books by the Native Plant Society on vernal pool ecosystems and maintenance. And there's other books that have valued wildlife and habitat environments.
I think we're going to give John the last word
Quickly
here.
say a couple of things on stewardship and of land and stewardship for the future. In a way, are two different things. Stewardship can occur in urban or suburban areas through local groups. In the city of Sacramento, there's local community activists and caretakers come around about over 20 areas important for little patches of native biodiversity and are very involved in their management and restoration, and that can occur a long time. In rural areas, landowners are the stewards, private landowners by and large, And they can be individual landowners. We went around a 5,000-acre cattle ranch in western Butte County and were amazed at the good things the rancher was doing a year ago. Or they can be a whole pile of people in a watershed who come together and discuss the future of their watershed. I think, however, society, we are this urban state with urbanizing metropolitan areas. We need to take regional views, and we need to say, what do we need to protect for the long term at a regional scale? And so far, California, by and large, has resisted that regional approach. Finally, on the value of things, I don't think you can put effective economic values on biological resources. And the problem our society faces is one of our false gods is the dollar bill. And we try to make everything fit into dollar terms. And neither environmental matters nor a lot of human and social matters can be reduced to dollar values.
All right, we're going to have to fold our tent here, remembering that whoever it is, there is only one true God, whoever that is, whoever that may be. Thank you very much for your attention and for your participation. And thanks especially to all of the panel members who I think gave us a lot of fine things to think about. Thank you.
What a pleasure.
Yeah, hope we meet again.
Yes. Bye-bye. Nice to meet you. Hi. Hi, how are you? Oh, sure, sure.